Around this time last year, I reviewed Sony's Xperia 1, and in hindsight, I really missed the mark. Among other things, I made the mistake of being too rigid in my viewpoint. I dinged it because it wasn't practical, because it was too niche to bring Sony the kind of success that I thought they wanted. At the end of it all, the Xperia 1 is a powerful device, no question, but it's not a sensible one, at least for most people. I mention all of this because I've been using that phone's successor, the $1,200 Xperia 1 Mark II, and I firmly believe it is Sony's best phone in years because they ignored people like me and made it even more of a niche device. Sony drew from its expertise in pro-grade photography and cinematography, resulting in a phone that feels like a love letter to creative types and barely anyone else. Because of that, it probably won't rocket to the top of the sales charts when it hits the US on July 24th, but if full creative control is what you're after, then the 1 Mark II inspires joy in a way no other phone will. Before we go any further, I have to mention a few things. First, to give the Xperia 1 Mark II the sort of fair shake I didn't last time, we're splitting this review into 2 parts. Today's video is going to focus on what the Mark II was like as a phone, and in part 2, we'll go deep on all of the camera stuff that makes this thing such a particular kind of pleasure to use. Sony has also been very clear that it will release a software update shortly after launch that, among other things, further tunes battery usage, tweaks camera performance, and adds the ability to shoot raw photos. Everything is stable enough that we're comfortable treating this as a proper review, but we'll post a follow-up if that update changes things dramatically. With a few exceptions, the Xperia 1 Mark II looks a lot like last year's Xperia 1, which is to say it looks like a remote control with glass, where all those buttons would be. Most of Sony's changes were pretty minor, but they were still pretty practical. Check it out, the Mark II sides are flat instead of rounded, which means you can prop the phone up carefully on a table so you can shoot photos and video. And instead of having a separate power button and fingerprint sensor, Sony just kind of mashed the two together, which is absolutely a good thing. Sony's commitment to this design also means it used another slightly outlandish screen, and I'm using the word outlandish with as much affection as possible. Unlike every other phone you'll find out there, the Xperia 1 Mark II has a 6.5-inch 4K AMOLED display, which looks just terrific when you're doing anything on it. And like very few other phones, this display has a 21:9 aspect ratio, making it look more like a handheld movie screen than a traditional smartphone. Widescreen movies and cinematic videos naturally shine on a display like this, but it's worth noting the 4:3 and 16:9 videos you'll run into on YouTube and other streaming services will be flanked by a lot of dead space. A screen as different as this is bound to be divisive. I can already tell people with small hands will find reaching to the top of the screen all but impossible without shimmying up and down the phone, and I'm personally still not convinced anyone actually needs a 4K smartphone screen. Sony also bucked the trend of high refresh rate displays here, but only kind of. It turns out the company couldn't source a 4K screen that ran at 90 or 120 Hz natively, but since they're all the rage, they tried to make up for it with a motion interpolation feature that attempts to smooth out fast movement on the display. It's a thoughtful addition, I guess, but the effect is often too subtle to even notice, so I'm left wondering why they bothered. Meanwhile, the rest of the 1 Mark II's screen features make it really clear who this phone is actually for. By default, the phone's display is set to show off the kind of punchy, vibrant colors you'd expect from AMOLED screens, but a built-in creator mode adopts a more subdued look that more faithfully reproduces a creator's intended vision. And if that wasn't enough, the phone offers really seriously granular control over white balance, in case you're the kind of person who gets worked up over that sort of thing. These tweaks go a long way in making this screen appeal to cinephiles and would-be auteurs, but they can't fix one annoying issue. The display is plenty bright for indoor use, but it's frequently just a little too dim for outdoors. Since the Mark II is clearly geared towards people who appreciate artistry, it's kind of no surprise that its audio game is also really strong. The phone's front-firing stereo speakers are excellent, giving movie scores and jolting sound effects a kind of presentness to do what they were designed to do. If you prefer to keep your media to yourself, that's also totally fair. There's a standard headphone jack here just for you. If I were you though, I wouldn't bother with Sony's dynamic vibration feature. It makes the phone rumble along with music and movie scenes like a game controller, but most of the time, it detracts from the audio experience instead of improving it. The rest of the phone is pretty typical Sony. It's crazy slippery to the point where you really need a case for it. And rather than force you to reach for a paper clip or something, you can actually access the SIM card tray by prying it out with a fingernail. You can even slip a micro SD card in there too if the standard 256 gigs of storage somehow was not enough. I also should point out that more accessible SIM tray doesn't actually affect the phone's durability. It's still rated IP68 for water and dust resistance. And since this phone is basically all about the camera experience, there is a physical 2-stage shutter button that sits low on the Xperia's right side. I really mean that, by the way. After over a week of use, it's easy to feel like Sony wanted to build a camera that does phone stuff instead of the other way around. When it comes to performance though, the Xperia is every inch a flagship device. That's all thanks to the Snapdragon 865 chipset and 8 gigs of RAM, which has been more than enough to plow through my usual workday multitasking and beautiful but somewhat embarrassing rounds of Call of Duty Mobile. In theory, it might not be as future-proof or handle certain memory-intensive tasks as well as devices like the OnePlus 8 Pro or the Galaxy S20, both of which are available with up to 12 gigs of RAM. I'm not convinced that's a deal breaker though. If there's something you need to do on an Xperia 1 Mark II, you are going to have more than enough power to handle it. It doesn't hurt that Sony has a light touch when it comes to software either. The Xperia runs a mostly clean version of Android 10, and the few extra apps that Sony did add here were almost universally helpful. In addition to the 2 pro-grade camera apps we'll get to another time, there is the PlayStation app for streaming games from your console, an app that lets you remotely control a Sony Alpha camera, and Call of Duty, just for fun, I guess. Really, the only stinker here is Sony's homemade News Suite app, which is it's just bad. It looks like it was designed 10 years ago, it slips ads into its newsfeed, and it frequently offers stories from news outlets I want nothing to do with. If I was interested in what The Sun thought about Kanye's presidential run, I would go exactly where The Sun belongs, a grocery store checkout line, and I would read it there and I wouldn't pay for it. A few other additions were designed to help you get the most out of the Xperia's oddly proportioned screen. One offers quick access to apps you can run in split screen mode in case you wanted to edit photos in Lightroom while looking at a tutorial at Chrome at the same time. This isn't really new, but having an app icon to just tap and get split screen mode going is a lot cleaner than some of the approaches we've seen over the years. Another feature called SideSense opens a palette of customizable app shortcuts, which seems helpful enough in theory. I mean, I will take any way to use this phone more easily with one hand, but it requires a very precise double tap on the edge, and I mean the edge of the screen. And after a week, I still cannot reliably get to those shortcuts on my first try. All things considered though, Sony did a great job here. It paired top-tier performance with thoughtful, clean software, and the end result is a remarkably speedy phone. For a device that feels as fast as the rest of this year's high-end crop though, the Xperia's approach to 5G is a little weird. In Europe and Japan, where the phone is already on sale, the Xperia 1 Mark II plays nice with 5G NR networks. In the US, however, the Xperia lacks 5G support entirely. And I guess lacks might not be the right word. There is no technical reason why the phone couldn't latch on to an American sub-6 5G network apart from Sony not wanting to go through the hassle. If you had your heart set on a true 5G Sony phone, you're just gonna have to wait for the Xperia Pro. I can live with that though, because Sony fixed one of my biggest issues with the Xperia 1, battery life. Last year's model was all right at best. If I played my cards right, I could get a full day out of it, but more often than not, I'd have to rush to a charger well before then. Not anymore. The Mark II's 4,000 milliamp hour battery isn't as big as what we've seen in other flagship phones, but it's still enough to reliably get me through a full day with enough juice left over for a bit of use the following morning. That works out to about 6 to 7 hours of screen on time, mind you, and those figures may still improve. That software update coming after launch will pack some battery management improvements, so we'll have to see how things shake out long term. So solely as a smartphone, the Xperia 1 Mark II is at least a little better than last year's model in every way, and that's already enough to get me thinking about buying one of these things if I could buy one for less than $1,200. Let's be honest though, the idea of buying an Xperia 1 Mark II only really makes sense if you want to go super in-depth with its cameras, and that's exactly what we're going to do in part 2. For now though, thank you for taking the time out of your day to walk with us through the phone half of the Xperia 1 Mark II. I don't want to spoil the next video, but this camera is absolutely wild. I don't think I've had as much fun using a smartphone camera since I took the Pixel 4 to a beach and tried to shoot the stars in the middle of the night. It's that good. And that also means it's that niche. So not for everyone, but I think a lot of you out there might like it. If you have feedback about the phone itself or how we're approaching this review, we'd love to hear it. Leave it in the comments below or email me at v@engadget.com. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next video.